class, it's Dr. Miller. Welcome to Integration into Ministry. This is a class that will focus on nonprofit management, but which should be applicable to all areas of leadership. In this class, we'll analyze various styles of leadership, look at what the Bible has to say into the field, and hopefully prepare ourselves to be future leaders in the church and in the world. I'm a pastor, a professor, and a nonprofit manager with 25 years of experience in leading the church. I carry a senior certified professional certification from the Society of Human Resource Management, and I've spent years teaching leadership in the classroom as well as practicing it on the front lines of strategic organizational development. My hope for you in this class is that you'll develop skills that you'll use in ministry in years to come. If you need anything during the course, please reach out to me. Welcome to Integration into Ministry. Well, hello class. I hope you have had a great week. Today we're going to talk about vision and how to cast vision for an organization and how critical it is to have strong vision in an organization. I want to give you an outline of today's class, and then I'm going to talk about the God sightings of the week. So for today's class, I want to do four or five things. I want to talk about defining vision. What is it? What does it mean to say an organization has a vision? 2, how do you share vision? How do you communicate vision once you have it? 3, what are a couple of critical steps to keep vision going? How do you keep obstacles of vision out of the way? And how do you pursue new inspiration for vision? And then fourthly, it is 4, I want to do a book report on one of my favorite books on leadership. It's called Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Barton. And there's really no other leadership book like it. And so I want to talk about that at length today. So those are the 4 things we're going to accomplish in today's class. And now it is time for God sightings. This week, I had a fascinating experience with God, and this is one that will, if you don't believe in God, this will stretch your beliefs altogether. Even if you do believe in God, sometimes people who believe in God believe that God exists up there in heaven somewhere, but think he's far away, and when God comes close, they're surprised by that. But don't forget, Acts chapter 17, verse 27, God did this so that we'd reach out for him and find him because he's not far from any one of us. And this week I found out that God is not far from any one of us. And I'll tell you about that. There's something that the Bible refers to as words of knowledge. And it doesn't mean knowledge in the secular sense, in the common sense. It doesn't mean reading a book and learning things. It means when one is suddenly aware of a fact about the world that one could not know in any kind of natural way. And you realize that God has put this knowledge supernaturally in your mind. I remember when I first heard a pastor talk about this many years ago, and I thought it was strange but kind of fascinating. He described a situation in which he was sitting in his office with a man from his congregation. And he said, we were not talking about the man's personal life, we were talking about something else. But suddenly I realized something was true, and I didn't know it in any natural means. I didn't know it in any natural way. But I suddenly became aware deep in my soul that he was having an affair. And he knew the name of the woman with which this man was having an affair. And he named it. He said, you're having an affair with, we'll call her Mary. You're having an affair with Mary, aren't you? And the man confessed that that was indeed the case. And he didn't know how the pastor could have known that. And I remember hearing that pastor tell that story and thinking, well, maybe God could do that, but I've never seen anything like that. Well, since then, that was many years ago. Since then, I've seen that happen many times, where suddenly I know something about the world around me that I could not have known in any natural way. And that's not so vague or general that it could just be a guess. It's very, very specific. And other people have this experience as well. So I take part in a prayer ministry just about every week now. And what happens is we get together on a Zoom call on Saturday nights, and people from all over the country, and even outside the country, call in and ask for prayer. And the 3 or 4 of us who are on a call will just pray for that person who calls in. And we don't know anything about that person except their name. We don't know what they do. We don't know where they are. We don't know why they called. We just pray. 1 Corinthians 14:1 says, desire the spiritual gifts, and above all, desire prophecy. And prophecy is the ability to speak what God is saying into someone's life and speak to that person's future in an encouraging and supportive and strengthening kind of way. And words of knowledge are sort of under the subset of prophecy. It's one of the angles of prophecy. And sometimes when we're praying for someone who's praying will say something that's dramatically and stunningly accurate. And then we'll pursue that. So this last week on a call, we were praying together. And first, the prayer team got together and we prayed for each other. And one of the women on the call prayed for me. And she said, I feel like God is saying that you've arrived. And I said, that doesn't mean anything. I don't know what that means. And she says, he's saying that you've arrived in the land. And it's specifically about land. And then she quoted a passage in the Bible about God's people inheriting land. And she said, and I feel like you're a minister. And so I told her I am a minister. And in fact, just that same day, I had been walking through a property that our church might inherit. And she had referred me to a passage in the Bible about inheriting the land. And so that was surprisingly accurate. Then it gets better. Then the first person called in for prayer. And we started praying for him. He was smiling. He seemed happy. We were encouraging him and praying for him. And then the same woman said, now I have to go out on a limb here. I could be wrong, but I just need to say this. I feel like you're not in the United States. I feel like you're somewhere else. And she's not the one hosting the Zoom call. She has no access to his personal information. And he said, that's correct. I'm in the Bahamas. I'm not in the United States. And so then in the next call, we were praying for a guy who was a big guy, looked tough, looked kind of scary. He was walking around a store while we were praying for him. And for some reason, I just felt really strongly, as big and tough as he looks, I think he works with teenagers. I think this guy has some profession involved in teenagers. So I said that. I said, hey, I could be wrong here, but do you work with teenagers? And he said, yeah, I coach a boxing league, and my students are all teenagers. And so we prayed for him and prayed for his work and his safety. And then the next person got on the call, and we started praying for her, and she shared that she had moved to a new place. So we started praying for her new home and everything. And then I felt it again, and I said, she hadn't said anything about her job at all. She didn't tell us why she moved or what she was doing. I said, I think you're in a caregiving profession. I think you're a nurse, aren't you? And she said, yeah, I'm a psychiatric nurse. And so we prayed for her job. But it was really a phenomenal time of prayer, and everybody felt encouraged. Everybody felt like God loved them and supported them. And there were multiple instances in that same call where several of us just had a read on something going on in a person's life that we could not know in any natural way. And so that's how God showed up in my life this week. You can have experiences like that as well. When you trust in Jesus and believe that he died for your sins, and ask him to come into your life and be your teacher and your guide, you can then have a prayer life that's dialogical. It's not just a monologue. It's not just you throwing up prayers to heaven. God wants to speak to you. And often we don't hear it. Often we're not attuned, we're not listening, we're distracted, we don't believe. But if you quiet your heart and ask Jesus to talk to you, he will. He wants to. He's eager to. And you'll maybe experience some prophetic experiences, some words of knowledge and prophecy. That is a gift for everybody. The Bible says, 1 Corinthians 14:1, above all, desire the gift of prophecy. And so that's something we should all chase after. So I hope that's helpful for you. That was my God experience of the week. Again, I'd love to hear your experiences of how God is working in your life, if God is speaking to you, if you see healings, if God is encouraging and inspiring you. Share those stories with me. Go ahead and put them in the comments if you want to share them publicly, or just send them to me privately. I love to read those and hear those, and I promise I'll leave your name off, but I like to share those stories with other people because it's always powerful to see what God is doing in the world. Okay, so let's get to our studies of vision. We're going to get into what vision is, how to communicate it to others, how to keep it going, and I've got another cute little cartoon video that I've made for you about crafting an elevator pitch, which is how one of the ways that we go about sharing vision. And so now, here we go. And now I'd like to define what vision is and to distinguish it specifically from strategy and processes, because those are not the same thing. And these often get confused. You'll hear people talk about their vision and their mission statement, and it's not exactly clear what the difference between the two of them is. So I want to define how I think the terms are generally intended in the literature today. Granted that words are flexible, so this isn't always consistent, but how it's generally used and how it will be helpful for you and I to use through the course of this class. Vision is that end game that you're aiming for, the thing that you want to be when you've reached your destination, and it's the goal towards which you are constantly reforming. So you check for the destination, you head in that direction, and then you recalibrate. You check and make sure you're headed in the same direction, and then you recalibrate. That's what the vision is. It's the place that you intend to end up. It's what you want to be when all is fulfilled. The mission, or we'd call it in our language in this class, the strategy, is the method by which you get there. And the place that churches most often go wrong is by replacing their vision with their strategy and their processes. And they lose sight of the vision because they fall in love with the strategy and the processes. And they don't keep recalibrating and rearranging strategy and processes to serve the vision. I'll tell you what I mean. Well, actually, first let me use a metaphor that will help us. So if you use the language of The Wizard of Oz, that famous movie, Dorothy is trying to find her way to the Emerald City. And the way to get to the Emerald City is to follow the yellow brick road, right? So yellow leads to green. And the yellow brick road is winding and it's circuitous. They get lost, they change directions, they get scared and run off path. They're constantly having to find their way to the yellow brick road to stay on the yellow brick road in order to reach the Emerald City. But the Emerald City is the goal. It's the vision, it's the direction. If the yellow brick road were wiped out, the vision would still exist. The goal is to get to the Emerald City. The yellow brick road is just the means of getting there. And what happens in churches is this. We initially begin churches, we found churches, we start churches with the goal of leading people to Jesus and creating a worshiping community that makes Jesus' name known. And loving people in Jesus' name. We have beautiful visions like that. When we're fully functioning, when we're thriving as a community, we will be a worshiping center that honors Jesus, lifts up his name, and loves people in his name. That's a vision. But then we develop strategies and processes by which to get there. And I talk a lot about this in my book, It's Like This, Visions That Help and Hurt the Church. And we develop, let's say we develop a music program that we love, or we develop ministries or classes that we love, and they're effective and they reach people. And now we have this legacy, this history of saying, look at these great things we do that help us fulfill our mission of getting to the vision of being a community that loves Jesus and loves people in his name. But then there's a shift that happens, and there are no warning bells that go off. There's no heads up that says, hey, your vision is being replaced by your strategy. You're starting to love your strategy more than your vision. But it happens in all churches. They start to say, well, we can't change our music program because it's been so effective. It's helped us lead people to Jesus, so we need to keep it. And the people who are already here love it. And they give money to the church So we need that money so we can keep fulfilling the strategies that are going to take us to the vision. So let's not change the music program. And that's why you walk in so many churches around the country, and I assume around the world, where the music is just painfully out of date, where it sounds like the 1980s. And they just haven't caught on to the fact that music tastes change daily in America. The way non-Christian people, the things non-Christian people are attracted to changes daily in America. And churches keep thinking, well, we loved it in the 80s, it ought to work in the 2020s. And it doesn't. A lot of churches are 50 years out of date and don't have a clue, don't have any sense at all that they have replaced their vision with their strategy and their processes. They've fallen in love with the strategy and processes. And when those strategies and processes no longer work to fulfill the vision, there's first sort of an anxious redefining of what the processes are doing. And they'll say, well, no, we think these are going to fulfill the mission of leading people to Jesus. It'll fulfill the vision of being a community that leads people to Jesus. We just haven't found the right people around us to love the way we do this, but they're still out there somewhere. Churches start to rationalize keeping things the same because they've fallen in love with the strategy and they've lost sight of the vision. Churches that are truly evangelical, that truly want to make Jesus' name known, are constantly revising their strategy and their processes. They're going back to the drawing board to say, wait, does this work anymore? How should it change? And there may be incremental changes that need to be made, and there may be tectonic changes that need to be made. My staff at my church knows that every year when we begin the calendar year, when we plan out our year, we don't hold on to anything we did last year, even if it was successful, if it doesn't have a clear reason that connects it to the vision of the church. If we're doing it simply because, hey, it was a big event last year and everybody loved it, so we have to do it again, that's not a good enough reason. If we say it brought in a lot of money, that's not a good reason at all. That's not why we do things as a church. The goal is to create a worshiping community that lifts up the name of Jesus and loves people in his name, introduces people to him through his love. And so we go back over and over again to our vision. All good churches do. It's the stuck churches that are still in love with the strategies and processes that don't work anymore and that have long since passed. In my book, it's like this. I use several different visions for churches, and several of them are wrong, and a couple of them are very good. And I want to give you a contrast between a wrong kind of vision and a good kind of vision. One vision that churches have for themselves, whether they name it or not, is they view themselves as a circle of wagons. And this is a metaphor that comes from the old prairie days when settlers were moving from the New England colonies across the country to the West Coast. California was made a state actually not that long ago, 150 years ago, and the settling of the West came about as pioneers rode across the country in their stagecoaches, in their wagons. And at night, when they would camp, they were afraid because they were out in the wilderness, and there were bears and coyotes and wild animals around, and it was very dangerous for them. And since they were bringing their families, they had children with them. It'd be very dangerous for a child to be out wandering around in the wilderness at night. So they would park their wagons in a circle, build a fire in the middle of it, and they would have their little community life inside the circle of wagons anytime they'd stop. And then when they'd go again, they'd drive off and form another circle of wagons wherever they stopped for the night. I've been at a church where people literally called themselves a circle of wagons. Like, they adopted that metaphor wholesale. And the goal was to raise children in a Christian community that was protected from the big bad world out there, from all the sinners and the bad influences and the media and the corrupted education that they were getting in their schools. And they thought they were just going to create a little Christian haven for already Christian people to be safe from the world out there. And that may sound really sweet for a Christian person trying to raise their kids in a healthy environment. But the truth is, the place in the Bible that vision appears is in the mouths of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the Jewish teachers of the law who got in arguments with Jesus every single day. Jesus' daily calendar was, work a miracle, fight a Pharisee. Work a miracle, fight a Pharisee. And the Pharisees were concerned about Jesus because he was not preserving the circle of wagons. Jesus was associating with tax collectors who took money from Jewish people to give it to Rome, and prostitutes who were corrupting Jewish integrity and their faithfulness to God, and Samaritans who were ethnic outsiders who would pollute the culture of Judea, the Samaritans. And Jesus would associate with all of them. Jesus was hanging out with the outsiders, the losers, the rejects, the corrupt and the bad influences. And the Pharisees hated that because the Pharisees wanted to be a circle of wagons. Too many churches out there have chosen to be a circle of wagons. They've chosen to be an insular Christian community that protects itself from a corrupt world around it to keep bad people out. Jesus loves those people that you're calling bad. Jesus wants you in community with those people that you're calling bad. Jesus wants you to love them and spend time with them and read their books and know what they watch on TV and know their language. Jesus didn't call you to hide out from them. He called you to go to them. And churches go astray when they commit themselves to being a circle of wagons. It's a horrible, corrupt vision. And churches don't realize it. They can't name that for what it is. But it's a sad mess when churches do that. Okay, so that's the circle of wagons. A better metaphor for the church is this one. When the Titanic was sinking, it sent out a distress signal. And not a lot of people know this about the story of the Titanic. The great boat that hit an iceberg and sank, which legend has it that someone said not even God could sink this ship. And sure enough, it sank and killed hundreds of people. As you know, you've seen the movie Titanic, you know. But there was a ship called the Carpathia that was a cruise liner that was out, and it received the signal. And the captain of the Carpathia said, we have to go rescue as many people as we can. And they launched out to rescue people, and they actually did. They pulled people out of the waters. The number of people who drowned in the Titanic would have been much larger if it had not been for the Carpathia. The Carpathia abandoned its role as a luxury ship and became a rescue ship, a lifeboat, out saving people who were lost. Now that is a good metaphor for the church. The church should be a lifeboat. We should be out seeking people who are lost in their sin, who are drowning in their brokenness, who are lonely and afraid, who are overwhelmed with anxiety, and we ought to be rescuing them, not closing our doors to them so that we'll be safe. Those are exactly the people Jesus would spend his life with and whom he taught his disciples to spend their lives with. I don't know where we got this modern church that thinks you're supposed to avoid sinful and broken people. Those are exactly the people we're supposed to spend our lives with. And so the church, as opposed to a circle of wagons, should be a lifeboat. It should be, if you've been living a comfortable Christian life in a safe, easy church, it's time to shut the luxury liner down and become a lifeboat and go out and rescue people who are lost. That's a vision. And churches that have vision are constantly reframing their strategies and their processes to serve a greater vision because it's the vision that Jesus gave us. That's what vision is. It's the dream of what we will become, towards which we constantly reform and which our strategies and our processes serve. So I hope that helps us define vision a little bit. Now I want to spend some time talking about how we communicate vision, and specifically I want to talk about an elevator pitch, which is a terminology that venture capitalists in Silicon Valley are well aware of, and which the church can use effectively too. now I want to talk about communicating vision. We've talked about defining it, what it is, and defining it against negative visions, visions for the church that aren't good. And now I want to talk about a means of communicating vision. Certainly there are many ways to communicate. If a leader feels vision, it just oozes out of their pores. It comes out in all kinds of directions. But there's a method of communicating vision, and you've now watched a cute little animated video I created about it. There's a method of communicating vision that's a good template to use to practice putting your vision into words to someone else. It's called an elevator pitch. And I don't know where that idea originated, but I know the narrative behind the image. It's the idea of a startup company in Silicon Valley with their new app or their new software and their principal partners going out and trying to raise money to fund this company. And the idea was that they were to imagine stepping into an elevator with one of the top venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, a billionaire looking for companies to invest in. And if you step in an elevator with them and you realize you're with this person who could fund your entire company, but you've only got 30 seconds to be with them. You've only got the length of the elevator ride to communicate your vision to them, and then you're going to get off the elevator and walk in different directions. What are you going to say in that 30 seconds? What are you going to say in that little bit of time that you have with that capitalist to ask them to support your venture? So an elevator pitch comes from that image of being in an elevator for 30 seconds. Okay, so a good elevator pitch has basically three components, and then we add a fourth, which is practice it. But the three components that go into an elevator pitch are these. First, you want to explain what is called in business your unique selling position. What makes your company or product unique to you? What is it that distinguishes it from other players in that same market, from other products in that same market? Why should they choose yours instead of a competitor's product? Your unique selling position is usually defined against what the rest of the companies in the market are doing. So if you had come out with a new hamburger restaurant, you might say, unlike all those franchised hamburger restaurants that serve frozen food in the same way with a limited menu, we're a new cutting-edge, healthy hamburger restaurant. We make all of our burgers fresh on site, and we wait until you order it before we make it, or something like that. You contrast yourself to the other people in your field. Unlike what they do, unlike the things that they do, here's what we do, and for that reason, ours is better. When it comes to churches, you can do the same thing. And I would never call out another church by name and say, unlike that church over there, because I don't like them. In the world of churches, we shouldn't see ourselves as competing with other churches. We should see ourselves as offering something that's unique to our church and might be appealing because it's uniquely something our church does. So I don't ever talk bad about other churches when I promote my own church, real life. But I do distinguish it from the other options that are out there. So for instance, you might say, if you're in a smaller church, you might contrast it to larger churches. And you might say, unlike larger churches, where there's a risk that you might feel like just a face in a crowd, our church is intimate and small, and you will get to know everyone by name. Or if you're a large church, and you want to contrast it to small church, you might say, unlike small churches which struggle for resources and often are barely holding things together, we're a church that offers all kinds of ministries and resources because so many people have put their hearts to this great work. So you can contrast yourself in a way that sets yourself apart from other churches without being altogether negative about other churches. It just defines in business, your unique selling position, but it defines your identity, your nature, and your personality as a church. I'll often say, unlike churches that are stuck in traditions and rituals from long ago, and which have not changed and adapted their message so as to reach a current generation. We're a church that holds to the truths of the gospel, but translates it in new ways in every generation so that we can speak to people who are living in the modern day. So you might contrast yourself to one of the big obstacles of churches. One of the common obstacles of churches is that they get stuck because, like I said, they love their strategies instead of their vision. And that's the contrast I often draw when I describe my church. I try to say, unlike churches that are caught in their strategies that they developed in the 1980s, we're a church that's just wed to our vision to introduce people to Jesus through the love of Jesus. And if you want to come help me, that's what we're doing. So that's the first thing to do, is to define what is unique about your church. Secondly, you want to name one thing specifically that you do, and you have to choose here because you've only got 30 seconds. Choose the thing you want them to remember most. What is it about your church that you feel like is most attractive and most compelling that you want to name? In business, this is often where companies or leaders will use statistics or data points that identify some success of their company. They'll say, unlike companies that have stagnated in recent years, our company has grown 50%. Right? They'll name a statistic that is sort of eye-catching. Or they'll say, there are many choices in hamburger restaurants out there. Ours was voted best in Los Angeles last year, right? So that's a statistic that sets them apart from other ones. With churches, you might want to do that. You might not. Sometimes churches like to put forward, unlike churches that are kind of stuck in their ways, our church has grown exponentially in the last 5 years, or whatever a church might say. Sometimes that's what they want to put forward. Sometimes that's you don't want to look braggadocious, right? You don't want to look arrogant here. But you might want to point towards the element of the church that you think is going to be most appealing to the person that you're talking to. Sometimes it's simply to say, unlike churches where everybody feels a little bit distant or a little bit stodgy, our church is warm and loving, and they will just surround you with love if you join our church. That's what most people are looking for. They don't care so much about your head count as the fact that when they come, you're going to care about them. I remember talking to a couple who were afraid to go to church because the woman had had an abortion and she thought everybody at church was going to hate her. And I told her, and you can only say this if it's true. Don't make promises you can't keep. But I said, unlike churches out there which would throw you out for your brokenness, ours is a church that will love you in your brokenness. And nothing's going to stop that. And I can say that with a great degree of confidence. And when she came to our church, she was stunned that it wasn't the way she thought churches were. She had grown up in very stale, traditional churches where everybody was very distant and very cold. And she was so stunned to find herself in a community that was actually filled with broken people trying to do right in our lives, trying to find Jesus and follow Jesus. And so often that's the point that you want to draw attention to is your community. You might want to add, and be real selective about this. You might want to add details about what's coming up on the horizon in your church. Unlike churches that this year have entirely shut down because in the pandemic they didn't know what to do, our church has worship services in the parking lot every Sunday, which is legal to do, and those are growing. And on top of that, our student ministry is having worship services for teenagers, so the teenagers can get out of the house again as well. And so that's things that are relevant to the current moment, but certainly for where people's hearts are and what people's needs are, those are important things to share. So share what's unique about your church by saying, unlike the other churches out there. And then secondly, share some interesting statistic or fact or point that you want to call attention to. Unlike churches out there that don't do this, here's what we do, and give a tangible explanation of what that looks like. And then thirdly, you want to round it out with a next step. You always have to have a next step, not just in an elevator pitch, but in everything the church does. When people come to an event at your church, you as a staff should have already discussed ahead of time what is the next step that we're going to point people to if they come to this event. So for instance, our church likes to do Halloween parties this time of the year. In October, we'll have a Halloween party, and we'll make sure that everybody at the Halloween party either texts in and gets a text back or picks up a bag of candy with a note in the side, and it will invite them to our next thing, which is in November. We're going to have a barbecue, which we call Holy Smokes, out in the parking lot. And it says, hey, if you like the Halloween party, come back to the big party next month. It's a barbecue with a live band. It's a worship event out in the parking lot. And in the world of the pandemic, we do this safely with social distancing and masks and so forth. But we point them to the next thing. If they come to the barbecue, we say, hey, come to our Christmas Eve services. And that's a step deeper now, because now they've gone from fun events to a worship service. So they experience our community as a church. And at the Christmas service, we'll point them either towards, we'll definitely point them towards weekly worship services, or maybe some event or seminar that's coming up in January. And so everything you do as a church should have a next step that you're pointing to. And everybody on staff should know what it is and be able to say it out loud. In the elevator pitch, this is the third step. For churches, you're often saying, if you'd like to join us, see us on Sunday. Come to worship on Sunday. And sometimes that's very effective. If you're talking to somebody who's already a Christian, who's moved to your neighborhood and is looking for a church, that's the next thing you might want to point to. But for people who are not Christians, we often point towards our big events like Halloween parties and barbecues. Often what we find is that people are more willing to join a small group Bible study in someone's home with a friend of theirs before they're interested in coming to the big church worship service. So we try to encourage folks to say, hey, if you're interested in this church, we're not like churches that do this. Here's what we're like. Why don't you come join a Bible study at my house? You can just come once. You don't have to sign up for the rest of your life. Just drop in and see what it's like. See if you like the people who are there. And that is one of the best front doors to the church you can have, because it introduces them to relationships first. People can duck in and out of events, but relationships are harder to duck in and out of. And so that's what we try to point people to. Okay, so let's summarize so far. You try to distinguish your church from other churches in your region, in your area, say, unlike them, and then here's what we do, and try to name some tangible statistic or fact or experience that you think is appealing or interesting about your church, and then say, now if you're interested in that, hey, why don't you join us on Sunday? Why don't you join us in November? Why don't you join us for this event? And point to a specific, tangible next step that allows you to follow up. You can say, hey, if you want that information, I can text it to you, or write it down for you, whatever you want to do. So that way you have a way to lead people into a brief 30-second introduction to your church that sets you apart and gives them a tangible next step that they can take if they want to be involved. And if you get in the habit of doing this well, I guarantee you will find that lots of people want to get involved. So those are the three components of an elevator pitch. The fourth thing we always add is, now memorize it and practice. The first time you do this, you're going to sound like a salesman, and it's not going to work, and you're going to be embarrassed. And that's okay. That's just part of the process. The more you do this, the more natural it becomes. I don't even have to think about this now, because I do it so often in my weekly conversations. I'll just casually be talking to someone, and they'll bring up something about church or experience, and I'll dive right into it. They'll talk about, I'm having trouble with my kids. And I'll say, oh, hey, I know people sometimes think of churches as places for elderly folks or adults, but our church has this really dynamic children's program and hundreds of kids, and the kids who come to our program just feel absolutely loved. If you'd like, I can put you in touch with Stacy, our children's minister, and you can talk to her about all the things they offer. Or you can bring your kids on Wednesdays to our tutoring program, or Sundays to our services. But I try to point towards the next thing that would be best for that person. And as I said, the more you do this, the more natural it becomes, the less you have to think about it. It'll eventually just roll off your tongue. So I hope that's helpful. That's the elevator pitch. Now let me name two practices that help us keep vision going. Once we've defined vision, once we've refined the way we want to communicate our vision, let's talk about a couple things that helps us keep it going. One, you want to ruthlessly eliminate anything that gets in the way of vision. And by that I mean, there are all kinds of things that make demands on our lives. There's personal life, there's work life, there's exercise, there's church activities. There are all kinds of things that make demands on our time. The people who succeed at expressing vision most powerfully are the people who eliminate anything that's just fundamentally a distraction. And I don't mean hobbies, because hobbies can sometimes widen our horizons and help us to relax. I mean wasted time that we may spend watching endless hours of television or video games, or in the world of pastoral ministry, getting involved in areas of pastoral ministry that don't actually help us with what we're doing. And here I'll use an example of one thing that I see pastors do wrong, in which they often get stuck. Pastors generally are hired for one of three things. We're hired to lead, we're hired to teach, and we're hired to give care. And no one is good at all three of these. Usually each pastor is only good at one of them, sometimes maybe one and a half, rarely two. But no one is good at all three of them. And so when you identify what your vision for the church is and your role in the vision of the church, you have to eliminate the options that you are not good at. And this is the one that most often happens. A pastor will have a vision to lead people to a promised land, to a kingdom. And yet they will get barraged with people calling to say, hey, I need you to visit me at the hospital. I need you to spend a couple hours talking to me. I need you to do my marriage counseling. And if that pastor is not by nature a counselor, that pastor is going to sink all kinds of time into something they're not very good at, and which will distract them from fulfilling the vision of the church. They won't be doing bad things. They'll actually be doing good things, but they won't be doing great things. And the good will prevent them from reaching the great. They'll do things out of duty or obligation or care or guilt, but they won't stay true to the vision of the church because they get wrapped up in secondary responsibilities that they should have delegated to someone else, either someone on their staff or a volunteer corps in the church. One of the first things I did when I founded a church was I created a care team of people who could nurture other people's needs. And in doing that, I basically said, here's a responsibility that I can't handle all on my own. I need to share this with a wider circle of people. And it builds such good bonds among the members of the congregation when they care for each other, when those who just have caring hearts get to go and visit somebody in the hospital or visit someone in their home or make calls to people who are in need. It's so relieving to them. And that allows me to focus on the area of teaching and leading the church and the things that I think are a better use of my time and a more responsible pursuit of my calling. But that's a major area where pastors go wrong. We get settled into doing things that aren't bad to do, not just TV watching, but things that actually aren't great. And so the ruthless elimination of those kinds of things is essential to keeping vision alive. What that means is setting boundaries and saying no. And some people do this just fine, but pastors are, as one writer called us, a quivering mass of availability a lot of the time. We just sort of make ourselves available to whoever calls on us because we want to feel needed and we want to feel like our job, which does not produce any tangible widgets, is somehow still important and valuable, as is measured by the number of things to which we say yes. And that's honestly not faithful to the vision that God gives you. There are a lot of things to which we have to say no in order to be effective. For instance, when people say, we want you to work 7 days a week, you have to say no. I'm going to take a Sabbath day, and on the Sabbath day, I'm not going to answer my phone, and I'm not going to read my emails, and you can't be in contact with me. And to do that is to be faithful to God. Mostly people will respect that, but there are people who will say, can't you just, this week put that off? You need to be rigorous about maintaining the Sabbath day, and all you have to do is point toward the scriptures and say, this is what we're called to. That's an example of saying no to things so that you can fulfill your calling well. So that's one thing, is saying the ruthless elimination of things that do not fulfill your vision. The second important thing to do in keeping vision alive is to pursue other leaders. And what you want to do is make sure you are regularly and constantly interacting with other visionaries and talk to them about how their visions are working. And I'll give you an example of something I've done with my staff for many years that has been tremendous for the expansion of our vision. It used to be with church staffs, we would go to conferences every year. And those are only so interesting. because speakers will stand up on a stage and they'll give their best speech, they'll use their best material, you'll hear a great band, and then you'll go home. And sometimes it's inspirational. But you don't get to actually sit down with other ministers and talk to them about what they're accomplishing, because the whole thing is focused on listening to a speaker on the stage giving a talk for half an hour. We decided we weren't going to do that anymore. And we started something called our Conference on Wheels. And our Conference on Wheels works this way. We pick out a city within driving distance of our home. And we plan on staying there for 3 days, usually Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And we rent a Verbo or an Airbnb, and we stay in a rented house together. Often you'll get cheaper than hotel rates if you rent a big house and everybody gets a room. We'll have nice meals together, maybe we'll go out to eat, maybe we'll cook together. But during those 3 days, we tour 6 churches. Now you have to set this up a good ways in advance to arrange this with the staffs of other churches. We'll tour one on Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, Friday afternoon, 6 churches. In those meetings, we engage with as many members of the staff as the other church is willing to bring together. We ask them what they do well. We ask them what they wish they could cancel. We ask them how they have designed their org chart. We ask them how they've laid out their facilities. We ask them which things they wish they had started early and which things they wish they had never started. What we do is we spend a concentrated 3 days delving into the ministries of other churches and borrowing their best ideas. We try to get a diversity of churches selected. So we'll go to a mega church, a tiny church, a brand new church, an old church. We'll go to a suburban church and a city church. We'll look at a variety of different options to try to get a good broad read on what churches in that area are doing. Even churches that we go to that are terrible, that are falling apart and that are struggling, and we usually don't land on one of those, but we have. Even churches that are in a miserable situation, we still learn things from. Sometimes we learn, well, we don't want to do any of the things that church is doing, but it gives us a shared vocabulary by which to talk about why we're not going to do those things. Remember how that played out at that church. Remember what we saw here. Remember what they said about it. More often than not, we go to churches that are doing well, and we love to hear what they're practicing. Sometimes we've gotten ideas about how to rearrange staff in a way that I just hadn't thought of before. Or we'll see facilities, and we'll get a sense for what room usage is essential and what room usage is excessive. I remember touring one church, and they said when we were building our campus, our building, we decided that every room would be large and multi-purpose. And ever since then, I've said that in every church I belong to. Every room needs to be large and multi-purpose. Let's build large and multi-purpose rooms. It's such a good practical idea that's one we took away with us. There are all kinds of ideas that I could share that I've borrowed from churches that we visited. But it's a great rapid expansion of the knowledge and understanding of the staff. It teaches us to think and talk together about what we're doing so that we're recalibrating towards the vision. We're rethinking our strategies to say, does this reach the vision? And because we do that usually once a year, we're constantly in that process of learning and absorbing more. So the Conference on Wheels has been a tremendous addition to our practices as a staff and has really helped us keep vision alive. Keep a vision alive by continuing to ask questions about vision, kick the tires of other people's vision, and talk about why vision works the way it does. If you're interested in reading about it, I've written an article that's still online. If you Google our Conference on Wheels and then my name, James Miller, it'll pop up in your search, and you can read the article that I wrote. There's some fun stories in there about things that my staff and I have experienced together. So those are 2 things that I do to keep vision going. One, I say no ruthlessly to anything that is a distraction from vision, even if it's a good thing to do, but it's something that's going to take me off course from what I'm supposed to be accomplishing, from what I'm called to. And 2, we persistently and continually learn from other visionaries. We ask other visionaries, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? How does it work? And then we take all the best ideas. We like to say it's plagiarism. We like to say there are no bylines in the kingdom of heaven. And so anything we find that's good, we bring it home. Jesus gets all the credit when we're done. And so that's how we find some of our best ideas. So I hope that's helpful for you, and I hope that that you'll ruthlessly pursue vision, saying no to the things that you need to say no to, and saying yes to learning from good and seasoned leaders. When we come to the end here of this class, I want to spend a little time doing a book review. Finally, I want to give you a little book review of another leadership book. Again, I'm trying to do one a week just to expose you to some of the great texts that are out there. But my little reviews don't substitute for reading them yourself. So make sure after listening to me review the text, you go and pick out the ones that you like and read them with your own two eyes. The book I want to talk about today is called Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Haley Barton. And it is a brilliant book. It is a tremendous book. I felt so strongly about this book that I made sure to get it in the curriculum of a class I taught at Fuller Seminary, in part to represent a diversity of authors in what was a very old reading list. But secondly, just because it's such a beautiful, powerful book. What Ruth Haley Barton does is she takes the life of Moses and explores it for its lessons in leadership. And it's not a casual look at the life of Moses with some preachy leadership lessons stuck in there. It's actually a profound and deep look at the way the human soul works. And it uses Moses as an example. But as you're reading about the story of Moses, you're going to be thinking about leaders that you know. And you'll be stunned at how accurate her portrayal of the trials of the human soul as it leads are, how profound her observations are. Moses, you know the story of Moses, if you've read the Bible. He grows up in Pharaoh's house, but then he sees an Egyptian slave driver beating a Hebrew slave. And he decides that he's going to protect the Hebrew slave. And he goes and he strikes the Egyptian slave driver, and kills him. And because someone recognizes Moses as the guy who killed this Egyptian, Moses flees out into the desert. And Ruth Haley Barton talks about the aggressiveness with which leaders pursue their vision only to find that they've overstepped themselves and gotten themselves in trouble by pushing too hard for what they thought was right. And how they then have to retreat into a season of privacy and growth. And as you read this, you'll just see how stunningly true it is to the life of a leader. And it's not a stretch. She's not misusing the story of Moses. She's talking about, here's what Moses must have experienced personally. This is what it must have been like to go through what Moses went through. Barton has experience having worked at one of the big mega churches of America and watching leaders do what they do. And you can, if you read between the lines, you can see how she's sort of analyzing some of the leaders she's worked with. So Moses then goes into retreat in the desert for many years where he lives as a shepherd. And he basically has shed now the wealth and the fabulous riches of the Egyptian empire that he grew up with as an adopted child of the Pharaoh. And he learns to live as functionally a peasant, probably hoping and expecting nothing more than to die a quiet death in the desert. But then one day he's out walking and he comes across a burning bush that is not consumed by the fire. And out of the burning bush, God speaks and tells Moses to go back and set the Hebrew people free. Barton will use this as an opportunity to talk about learning to listen, learning to pause and rest and listen, and how important it is for the leader to understand herself or himself as being led by the one who is the leader of us all, and pausing from that drive to accomplish things to actually listen to God's calling. Now, what's profound about this is that when God calls Moses to go set the people free, Moses says, I don't want to do that. I have a speech problem, and I definitely don't want to go back and talk to the Pharaoh. Who am I to do that? But God actually knows Moses' heart. Remember, Moses saw the Hebrew slave being beaten and wanted to save the slave. Moses is now going to be empowered to go and free all of the slaves. And Moses thinks it's going to be a terribly hard job and doesn't want it. But God knows the depths of Moses' heart and knows that, in fact, that's exactly what Moses wants. So God sends Moses out to be a leader called by God and to set the people free. As Moses leads people through the desert out of Egypt, he deals with the conflict that exists in his quote-unquote congregation, the conflict that develops as his own family members rebel against him, as people complain to him, as people's hearts are drawn back to Egypt, which they've now left, the safety of slavery over the freedom of wandering in the wilderness. And Moses has to wrestle with being this lone chosen person, chosen leader from God in the midst of this large complaining people. And at certain points, Moses even turns and says, God, it's your fault. You gave me this people. Why would you give me this stiff-necked people, this stubborn people? And you get to explore the development of Moses' heart as he wanders through the desert, leading the people to freedom. I don't want to reveal too much of the book because really the reading of the book is such a powerful experience. But that's what it is. It's a tour of the leadership lessons of the life of Moses. Not in a business way. It doesn't read like a book that came off of Wall Street. It reads like a deep spiritual manual that could have been written by a Catholic mystic, but it's actually written by a modern evangelical Christian reflecting on the scriptures and reflecting on her experience of leadership. So that's a worthy book that I will commend to you. That's our class for the day. That's a little insight into vision. I hope it helps you think through vision. I hope it helps you define a vision for your life. And if you're a leader in the church, I hope it helps you get a better read on how to cast vision for the people that God has called you to lead. Hope that's helpful. God bless you. I'll see you again soon.